When the skirmish erupted between Kevin McCarthy and his supporters and the 20 or so House dissidents, almost all of them drawn from the House Freedom Caucus, when all of that was occurring, it was acrimonious, it was somewhat bitter, and it was being, of course, amplified in the media. And there were some people, even some Republicans, who were like, "This is no way to do business. This discussion should occur behind closed doors. Why are we holding up the important business of Congress?" And of course, people like Dan Crenshaw, who wanted McCarthy to be, you could almost say, accepted by group acclaim. We don't even need to have a vote. Let's just all agree he's our great leader. Crenshaw was, again, suggesting that there's important business for the House to do, and that business would be held up by this kind of an unconscionable delay. But we now know that the delay was short. 4 days? Big deal. As if to say that, this is something that couldn't wait because things had to be done. No. 4 days later, we look at the result and we realize the result is much, much better. The reason it's that this ploy worked, and it was a risky ploy because, of course, things would have gone very bad had McCarthy become so desperate that he started courting the votes of Democrats. This is something in the back of my mind I was worried about. I didn't think it was likely, but nevertheless, it was possible. But fortunately, it didn't happen. And the two sides have kind of come together. McCarthy has made a whole bunch of concessions. And the key point is that concessions aren't minor. They aren't just procedural. They changed the whole way of doing business in the House. And I talked about that yesterday. They've resulted in important things like a new church committee to investigate sort of deep state abuse. That's going to be critically important. That's something that we simply had to do. And I think it would be a real black mark against the GOP if it had left that out. But I want to give you some sense of the comprehensiveness of the McCarthy agenda. This is not McCarthy's own agenda. This is the agenda that he agreed to with, kind of a gun to his head. In other words, what the House Freedom Caucus guys realize is, in a way, we have more power than McCarthy. True, he has 200 votes and we have 20. And this is the point that kind of Hannity never got. Hannity's like, well, to Lauren Boebert, well, why don't you concede? You're asking McCarthy to step down, but he has 200. You have 20. But the point is, McCarthy needed to get almost all the Republicans to become Speaker. And so they realized, the Boebert and others, that McCarthy needed them more than they needed him. And so they cut a deal that's a very favorable deal. And let's look at some of the things that McCarthy has agreed to. In addition to the committee to investigate the deep state, in addition to the new way of doing business in the House. And by the way, in addition to the repeal of the IRS agents. Now, by itself, that doesn't defund the agents, but it does put some legislative power behind that idea, an idea that I think will live to fight another day. McCarthy agreed that a single congressperson acting on a Jeffersonian motion can vote to remove the Speaker. That's new. I mentioned the church-style committee. Term limits are going to be put up for a vote. Again, congressmen generally don't like term limits. You can kind of see here the view of the Republican establishment. We'd like to be congressmen as long as we can. If we stop being congressmen, we want to be running for the Senate. But we don't really want to go back to normal life where we have to get up at 8 in the morning, shave, do a normal day's work. So they don't like term limits, but term limits is on the agenda. Single subject bills, no omnibus bills that just have 400 things in them where you don't even have time to read it, and all kinds of giveaways and earmarks are thrown in there. The Texas border plan is going to be put before Congress. And this is, by the way, an effort to create a full physical border infrastructure, change border enforcement policies, enforce our laws in the interior, which is to say to go after lawbreakers who are roaming free among us, and finally target cartels and criminal organizations. Biden's border policy, a complete disaster. It looks like the House is at the very least going to be making some genuine effort to challenge all this. COVID mandates will be ended, as well as all funding for them, including so-called emergency funding. A lot of times, by and large, the Biden administration, it's kind of like ask and you shall receive. It's an emergency. We need to have this allocation of additional money. And the House GOP answer now, no. Budget bills don't automatically defer to a kind of extension of the debt ceiling. In other words, spend as much as you want. If we don't have the money, we don't have the guts to raise taxes to get it, we'll just raise the debt ceiling. No, there are a whole bunch of Republican congressmen now that want to put a rein on spending. Look, the United States is a very rich country. We can spend a lot of money, but there is a limit. Because the fastest way to become a poor country is to keep outspending your means, to keep raising the deficit and the debt, which has now reached gargantuan astronomical levels. So introducing an element of fiscal prudence. Now, will all of this pan out? Will all of this result in good things? I don't know. We have to be cautious, and we also have to be vigilant in keeping our House members on their toes, so to speak, because, and I think the House Freedom Caucus is going to try to make sure that these concessions, these agreements, these deals made by McCarthy are in fact kept and are enforced, because if they're not, let's remember, it only takes one member of the House to put McCarthy's own speakership up for a vote.